Welcome back in, everybody, to the First Pick Podcast. I'm your host, Anthony Rivardo. I'm joined again today by my friend, Maxx Smith at Bears Max on X. Go ahead and give him a follow. And today, we are talking about the quarterbacks once again. This is not the first time on this channel we talked about the quarterbacks. We did a full hour-long episode strictly discussing Caleb Williams. We know he's the most polarizing prospect in the class. He's the projected first overall pick. And we'll touch on him again today. But previously, we did an episode. Go check it out on the channel talking about whether we think he's a boom or a bust. So you'll hear a little bit more on that in this episode. But we're going to be going ahead and ranking our top 5 quarterbacks in the upcoming 2024 NFL draft class. We did this for the top 5 wide receivers in the draft class, did some honorable mentions as well. Go back on the channel, check that one out. We got a lot of great comments on that, so appreciate that for sure. But today I want to talk about these quarterbacks because this is an exciting class. Max being a Bears fan, me being a Giants fan, we both have a little bit of a special interest in this position going into this offseason with both of our teams potentially drafting quarterbacks at the beginning of the draft. And there's a lot of teams that need quarterbacks. And thankfully this year, there's a lot of quarterbacks to be had in that first round. So we're going to go ahead and go into some honorable mentions first and discuss that before we get into our top 5. But before we do so, Max, how are you doing today, my friend? And what are your thoughts on this quarterback class?
Yeah, shaking it up, going honorable mentions. You guys like the wide receiver one so much, so we figured we'd get into the quarterback bag, which is even more polarizing. So doing great. Just been sitting around watching some of these Senior Bowl clips and some of the tape coming out, excited for the game. I actually think it's really interesting how much more relevant the Senior Bowl has become over time, specifically because it gives scouts and couch scouts like us an opportunity to see how guys perform in pads against each other before they go to the combine, which of course is just pure tape, right? Like just pure measurements, which doesn't translate necessarily as well as how do they look with pads on. So I think it's an awesome thing. I'm glad they keep doing it, and I'm glad that it's just growing and they're getting more and more and more high quality prospects to sign up and agree to do it because it just helps their stock. So, or it hurts their stock, which in the instance of a guy who was literally on my honorable mention list, just yesterday until today, Bo Nix has gone completely off my board. If in previous episode we threw a little side joke about Bo Nix, I was pretty big on Bo. I thought he was a good prospect for a team that was ready for a backup to develop into a full-time starter. That was like Bo. I don't know anymore. So he's completely off my board. Now, let's say, you said, if he comes into the Senior Bowl and he balls out and he becomes MVP, okay, he'll be back on the board. But for now, these throws are disgusting. He's underthrowing guys. He's overthrowing guys. Not a good look for Bo. So he's off my honorable mentions. But the guy who I will say is on my honorable mentions, and he might be on yours as well, is a bit of a shocker, and that's South Carolina's Spencer Rattler. Very polarizing guy considering his career arc, kind of his enemy arc that he's had in media over the past couple of years, with the QB show and everything. Dude was kind of a punk. But he's progressively gotten better, right? His stats have improved subtly, slightly since he entered the quarterback position in South Carolina. He hasn't been really on a great team. I know I was negative about him in the wide receiver video when we were talking about Xavier Legette, but I had an opportunity to sit down and watch him some more. And I think he might be one of the most coachable quarterbacks in this draft class. I don't think his talent, his ceiling is nearly as high as anyone else, but I think he's a guy that scouts are going to fall in love with, offensive coordinators can fall in love with, because his fundamentals are there. His feet are great. His pocket presence is great. He has some issues with his mechanics and his throwing motion, and I think that's something, right, that you could fix potentially. But I think he's a guy that if you sit down and you really look at him, you go, wow, okay, there might be something there. Literally a quarter of his completions were to one guy at South Carolina. So if you put him in a position where there's multiple guys to throw to, there's multiple reads instead of just Xavier Legette, he might flourish. So that's my honorable mention, Spencer Rattler. He might surprise you. Take some time and watch him. I wouldn't say we should take him, but if he falls to 6, maybe 5, why not?
Yeah, Spencer Rattler is not going to be a first-round pick in this draft. You're being silly now. But in terms of being a top 5 quarterback in this class, I also don't think he's there quite yet. Honorable mention for sure. He's definitely in there for me. I have to touch on your Bo Nix conversation that you started here. The overreaction to the first 2 days at the Senior Bowl. You're not the only one having them, so I can't just pinpoint this on you and get on under your skin too much. There's a lot of fans who are overreacting to Bo Nix's first 2 days at the Senior Bowl, but I'll just say day 3, he could bounce back, throw a bunch of lasers, and people are going to be back on the hype train. And again, we're recording this 2 days into the Senior Bowl. I don't know if it's going up 2 days into the Senior Bowl. It's probably going up in a few days. The Senior Bowl might have even taken place by the time this happens. So I think that Bo Nix's performance in that game in particular is going to be really important for his draft stock. He is going to be in my top 5 once we get into that, and I'll touch more on Bo Nix then. But I do want to talk about Spencer Rattler now because he's also an honorable mention for me. Don't have him in my top 5, but I see what you see, and I see what a lot of people see. This is a guy who, at one point, people thought could be the consensus number 1 overall pick if his career went according to plan. It didn't go according to plan, so now he's considered a mid-round developmental prospect. And when you're looking at developmental quarterbacks, I like his traits. I think he's got a good arm. Like it's got some accuracy issues, sure, but he's got a strong arm. He's got some pretty good footwork for the most part. A couple times he gets off platform when he probably shouldn't, sure. But these past 2 days at the Senior Bowl, what we've seen, Spencer Rattler's been playing well. It helps that on his team at the Senior Bowl, he does have Xavier Legette playing with him. So he's got a familiar face and he's already got that chemistry baked in with Legette. That helps. And obviously, you guys know how I feel about Xavier Legette. He's a monster. I think he's a first-round prospect. But Spencer Rattler is showing things. I think there's moments on his film where he's very calm in the face of pressure and he delivers strikes. There's other moments where, yeah, he's a little bit erratic. But overall, I think when you look at him, the stats are ugly, but I think that there's something there. If a team takes a chance on him in the middle rounds and gives him time to develop, I think that we could see something pretty solid out of Spencer Rattler in his NFL career eventually. Again, I don't think this is a guy who's going to step in day 1, be a good starter as a rookie. But if he bides his time behind the veteran backup for 2 or 3 years and then, injury happens down the line and he gets a chance to start, he's a guy that I could envision getting that starting job as a fill-in and then running with it and earning it full time. I do envision that for Rattler. I just think that he's got some pretty good traits to his game. But I think we'll go ahead and move into our top 5 list now, Max. I want to talk about who you have at number 5 because I don't think he's on my list, so I'll use him as another honorable mention. But who do you have?
So at number 5, number 5, I have a little bit of a controversial take. I have JJ McCarthy out of the University of Michigan. Now, this is a guy that a lot of people love to hate, and it might just because he was at Michigan. But I don't know. There's just something about watching him play, and I know he excels out of the play design. I know he excels when things break down. I know he excels when he rolls to his right. He makes those crazy off-platform darts that he loves to do, and he does well. I also know that he doesn't throw the ball a whole lot, and I know there's question marks as to why does Harbaugh not let him rip it. But I also know he plays in the Big Ten, and Big Ten has always and will forever be a run-first conference, regardless what Ohio State wants to make it. That's just the reality of it. And when you have a guy like Blake Corum, who all season was just a monster, why not, right? So I don't know. I think JJ's shown enough in his ability to read the field. The arm talent is pretty nice. He's like a less flashy Zach Wilson, except he can see the field a bit better, and he played against better competition, in my opinion. JJ's pretty fast. He's an athlete, too. He can pick up yards with his feet if he needs to. I think Zach had the better cannon, but JJ is just good. Like, I don't think he's going to walk in and completely be awful. I think he's a guy that's more developmental than some of the others on this list. But I feel like I've seen enough for him to be like, yeah, this is the 4th, in my opinion, the 5th best quarterback in this draft class. And if you're sitting in round 2 or 3 and you want a developmental guy to sit behind you and one day take over, like I'm literally looking at like Seattle. I feel like this is a perfect guy for you to just bring in, right? Like Geno's only getting older. He might fit the system incredibly well. Geno and JJ make sense. They have some similar playing abilities. Why not? Like this is a guy that's going to be able to excel throughout time. And Harbaugh had nothing but nice things to say about him. And again, he compared him to Andrew Luck. Like, I don't know why he did that, but he did. He's nothing like Andrew Luck. But for some reason, he's like, this is the best quarterback at Michigan history, point blank. I mean, Tom Brady, of course, was a Wolverine. But also, he's like, this is one of the best guys I've coached since Andrew Luck. And you're like,
he said he has generational leadership skills. Generational leadership skills. What does that mean? Harbaugh said he had generational leadership skills. What does that even mean?
I don't know what that means. I know that he likes him a lot. So That's great praise. And
Sure.
for me, there's enough there that I think that he's number 5 on my board.
All right. Well, I have him number 6 on my board, but once we get to my number 5, we can kind of talk about why maybe he's JJ McCarthy's number 5. But I'll kind of give my rundown on him, how I view him as a prospect. Obviously, big red flag is that he wasn't asked to throw in big games. There's that Penn State game where he didn't touch the ball in the second half. I mean, he touched it, but just to hand it off every play. That's a red flag to me. If you're not able to throw in those big games, every game in the NFL is a big game. You know what I'm saying? And so that's one of my red flags for him. Another red flag is that everybody uses this as some green flag. He's 21 years old. That's not a big deal to me. I don't value him being a younger quarterback prospect in comparison to these other guys nearly as much as most, Twitter scouts seem to. I don't think it matters that he's 21 versus Drake Maye, who's 22. What's the difference? Or Jayden Daniels is 23. I understand Jayden Daniels played in college for 5 years, has more experience under his belt, and is a later breakout, but I don't think McCarthy's even had a breakout, and nothing has really told me that he will have a breakout at the next level. So in terms of his traits, what he does well, I agree with you. He's got some really solid athleticism. I think that he's got some pretty good arm talent. He's a pretty good processor, but again, he doesn't do anything special to me. Nothing blows me away with McCarthy. And that's my big pause on him. There's other guys, like even my number 5 guy, who I really narrowly have over JJ McCarthy. He does at least a couple things special. But JJ McCarthy, I just don't see anything entirely special in his game. And you said developmental quarterback. Absolutely. He's a developmental guy. I think the first round buzz on JJ McCarthy is just ridiculous. I don't see it personally.
Totally.
And I'm not trying to just spit hot takes here, but and I don't know if I'm being too blunt or too bold in my opinion, but there's just nothing special to him yet. He's very young and he needs a lot more time to grow. In my opinion, McCarthy would have been a player that should have stayed for an additional year in college and actually transferred somewhere that let him throw the damn football, improve those skills, then went to the NFL. Obviously, that's not the way it works. Harbaugh left, so obviously he's going to declare into the draft. But he's going to have to go somewhere that's really patient with him, gives him a lot of time to grow and a good system to grow into. And then hopefully that coach isn't fired by the time he's ready to take over. So I think there's a lot of moving parts with JJ McCarthy. Again, I think he's just overall, there's not huge glaring weaknesses in his game, but there's no glaring strengths. I think he's just very average.
I think there's a very glaring strength in his game, and that's the ability for him to limit turnovers. I think he doesn't force the ball. He puts his team in positions to win, right? And I know that this is the eternal debate of what a quarterback should be. And I think this is an evolving debate, especially with guys like Brock Purdy, who's in the Super Bowl, right? You have a magician in Patrick Mahomes who got to the Super Bowl because of him, right? And his defense. But then you have guys like Brock Purdy who got to the Super Bowl because of the guys around him, right? Like he didn't put the ball in harm's way. He got a little lucky, but ultimately he was like that game manager type guy that sure he balled out. He picked up yards with his feet. He made big plays, but he got to this position because of his ability to manage the game, right? JJ can do the same exact thing. That's what I think for me is enticing about him is he can pick up the first downs when he needs to with his feet. He's thrown as many balls as Jayden Daniels has this season. Like, it's not like he doesn't throw. It's not like he has 200 attempts. He has over 300 attempts this year. Now, his yardage is nowhere near Jayden Daniels. His touchdowns are nowhere near Jayden Daniels. But he's only thrown 4 interceptions. So is Jayden Daniels, fun fact, by the way. But that's what I'm saying is, like, he doesn't limit mistakes. He's asked to do what he's asked to do. That's what makes him a 5 for me.
And I can't disagree with you in that sense. Like, I don't see it with JJ McCarthy, but I see where people come from when they say he's a top 5 quarterback in this class. But anybody that pushes him up into the top 3, I take serious reservation to that,
For sure.
So,
yeah.
And I think you make a good point. He's good at keeping the ball out of harm's way. And I would say that Brock Purdy comment that you made is maybe the most compelling for any JJ McCarthy argument that I've heard to this point. Just kind of say that maybe he's not a game changer, maybe he's not an elite first round prospect, but surely he could, in the right system, be one of the best game managers in the NFL and win a whole bunch of playoff games. That's possible. And I think that with more development, I mean, Brock Purdy, when he stepped in, was like really good, absurdly good from the start. But he was a really good game manager, and more, in my opinion, I know Brock Purdy is like a really hot topic of debate, but I've seen him add more and more to his game, like week in and week out. We've seen him
Absolutely.
do more of those off script and kind of create your own play things in recent weeks as the 49ers have now gone to another Super Bowl. So I think that the Brock Purdy argument is the most compelling one I've heard. So thumbs up for that one, Max. I think that JJ McCarthy comp to Brock Purdy, I don't necessarily see it 100%, but I see shades of it, and I think that's the most compelling argument. So I like that. But let's move on to number 5 on my list, which I don't know if he's on your list, but that's going to be Michael Penix Jr. out of Washington, another player who is currently at the Senior Bowl. Haven't seen too much about him at the Senior Bowl. Haven't really dug into that just yet. But my first comments on Michael Penix, I have him at 5, but this could be McCarthy because in some respects, I almost don't think Michael Penix Jr. would belong on some teams' draft boards because of his medical history. Having 2 torn ACLs in his collegiate career already is very scary, is a huge red flag. And so if there are teams that just take him off their draft board entirely, I will not be surprised. In fact, I've read insiders and reporters with ESPN, wherever, have said that there are teams that don't view him as a top 3 round prospect because of the injury history. And I totally understand. But there is something to be said about Michael Penix Jr.'s ability to rise to certain occasions. I think he played really well in some big games, maybe not so well in others, but I like his competitiveness and I like his ability to make big plays happen. Is he one of those Caleb's? Is he an off script, run around for 5 seconds to throw? No, but he is one of those guys that stands strong in a pocket and has a lot of arm strength and does hit downfield shots when he needs to. And that's what I like about Michael Penix Jr. When we were talking about him like almost over a month ago, Max, we were texting about Michael Penix and we were talking about his athleticism. And I was like, all right, so he's not an athlete. Like he's not going to run. It's not going to be part of his game. But he's kind of, in my eyes, one of those athletes that's like Big Ben Roethlisberger, where he shouldn't move as well as he does, but he does scamper for 15 yards at a pop when he needs to. So I like that part of Michael Penix Jr., but I do like the fact that he wins from the pocket. He wins in structure. He drops back and he throws accurately. Is he perfect? No, but those are kind of like my initial thoughts and my initial take on Michael Penix Jr., Max. I'm kind of curious if he is in your top 5 and kind of where you're at on Michael Penix.
Yeah, so this is a perfect transition to 4 because he's my number 4.
Nice.
So I can talk into that and why he's above JJ for me or why he's in my 4, and then we can transfer to your 4. Michael Penix Jr., what makes him so alluring to me, like as you know, if I'm in the role of GM or if I'm in the role of a scout, is the reps, right? Is we've seen guys who have come into the NFL with limited reps at college and have completely failed because one, they didn't really have a lot of time at the quarterback position to begin with. And now you're asking them to play it at the highest level in the world. That's brutal, right? Mike Penix doesn't have this issue because of those injuries. You know, it's like a weird double-edged sword. Is because he spent more time in college, he's had more opportunities to sling the ball, and especially because of where he's played and the style of offense that they've run and that kind of like air raidy spread that was up there at Washington. 555 attempts. That's crazy. That's an insane amount of throws. And he almost threw for 5,000 yards, which is also pretty crazy. And he had a great supporting cast around him at Washington, right? You don't go that deep, for Washington as Pac-12 team to go that deep. Doesn't happen unless you have a lot of support around you. Of course, like think about Rome Odunze and some of that offensive line talent there that will go early in the draft. But really, he stood out for his big time throws, and those deep balls are insanely nice. He made Rome Odunze's job a little easier because of how well placed some of those balls are. He's gotten beat in some like big time games, which I know is also a red flag. Does he stand up, to some of the pressure? Specifically against Michigan, he kind of choked a little bit through some 2 really bad interceptions, and that's a red flag for sure. But I think he's more, and again, most of my skill, like the way that I've listed my ranking is a part of it is talent for sure. Like a little bit of this, how ready are you just to plug and play in the NFL? And then third is like that special attribute, right? Like, is there something uncoachable? Is there something untangible that you have? Michael Penix's deep ball is pretty like that's his special factor. To your point, he's a stand in the pocket guy. Some teams love that. Some teams don't. He's big. He's strong. I'm not really worried about him re-injuring in the NFL because it's kind of a weird injury to have. Like, I don't think that's something that's really going to come back to bite him up in the butt, especially after this full season that he had healthy. And if you have like a really good line around him, it shouldn't be that big of an issue. I think he's a risk you're willing to take because you need to value experience. You need to value how many times this guy has let it rip, and he's played in an offense that wasn't necessarily really easy. Like, it wasn't necessarily a one read offense for him. He would stand in the pocket and he would read and he would move his feet and he would stick in there if he got hit, which wasn't very often, by the way, because of how good that offensive line was. But I digress. I could talk about Michael Penix for a while just because there's so much there. But that's why he's my number 4. Is I think as we go through the combine and he's throwing at the Senior Bowl, I think more people are going to go, wow, this guy, there might be something there. There's already a lot of people that are on his hype train. Like, I don't think deservedly he should break into the top 3, but I think he's good enough just to be right in that conversation. Again, I understand the injury histories. I really do. I think that's a red flag for sure. But, like I said, I don't know if that's really going to be like a big enough issue for me to stay away from a guy if I'm late in the first round and I really need a quarterback,
Yeah, I personally can't get behind him as a day 1 pick. I only see 3 quarterbacks in this class that I can get behind as a day 1 pick. And again, I think this class is really strong because I see probably at least 3 guys I view as day 2 picks. And that's where Michael Penix lies for me. I have Michael Penix as a day 2 pick. And again, a lot of that does have to do with the injury, but a lot of that has to do with just the fact that there are special traits, but elite traits. I struggle with him and McCarthy both to find something just overly elite. And I think if you build an offense around Michael Penix Jr., give him a lot of talent around him like he had at Washington. Because, I mean, you're talking about Rome Odunze, even Jalen Polk. I don't know if you mentioned him, but like, he's also a stud. He's a really good wide receiver too. And it's somebody who I think is going to go on day 2 as well in the draft. So Michael Penix had a lot of talent around him. Don't even get me started on the offensive line. I got some stats on that, though. You mentioned it. He was under pressure on only 27% of his dropbacks. But one thing that I do have to point out here that is really, really impressive, he had a 7.6% pressure to sack rate, which is incredible. That means when he's under pressure, he is getting the ball out of his hands. There's other quarterbacks in this class that are up to the 20% on that statistic.
And that stuff translates. That stuff is like super important for the NFL.
I agree. And time to throw is also something that translates in the NFL and is important. And his time to throw was 2.68. When kept clean, it was 2.43. Under pressure, it was only 3.35. Those are really good numbers right there. That shows you a quarterback with a little bit of season. And yeah, he's been obviously hurt for 2 of these seasons, but he has been in college football for 6 years. So that makes an impact there. But you see a little bit of season there and an ability to get into the pocket and get the ball out in a quick and calm manner. And that is very important, especially when you're talking about how often he was hitting those deep shots. I mean, to get the ball out quick and still hit those deep shots and throw them with accuracy. There's a lot to like about Michael Penix Jr. And I do think that a team is going to feel convicted about him on day 2. And I think there's a pretty good chance that he gets drafted early. And I could see him having a successful NFL career. But again, there's just some other prospects that I have higher on my board. So where are we at now? Are we at 4 or are we at 3?
Yeah, we're at 4 for you. I just did 4 because.
Okay, 4 for you with Penix, 4 for me. This is the guy we were talking about earlier. It's Bo Nix. So I have Bo Nix at 4, and let me kind of break down why. I think in some ways, please, I think in some ways he's getting overlooked for silly reasons. Like, people overreacted to the first 2 practices at the Senior Bowl. To me is silly. I think give it more time. There's a full week of practices to get done. Another one, he's too old. I don't quarterbacks play until they're like 40 if they're good. I don't view the age thing with a receiver entering the NFL at 24. Okay, that matters. A running back entering at 25, that matters. A quarterback entering at 24, that's okay to me. And one of the things that I love about Bo Nix is how he got better every single year and then really exploded for Oregon this past year. I mean, he was throwing lasers. He was probably one of the most accurate quarterbacks in all of college football. He played at a very high level for Oregon this year. And what I love most about him is his ability to keep the ball clean. He just never turned the ball over. I mean, I think his PFF turnover worthy play percentage was like 1% or something ridiculous. Like, he just never puts the ball in harm's way. And so elite traits physically, accuracy wise, maybe they're not there, but decision making and ball security, I think he's pretty elite in that matter. And I think that's why when you look at him versus some of the other quarterbacks in this class, he could step into an NFL offense. And yeah, he's going to struggle. All rookies do. But at least he's not going to struggle in the Bryce Young way where he's throwing a lot of picks and he's putting the ball in harm's way constantly, right? He's going to struggle probably to find the open man, and he's maybe going to take sacks because he's holding on to the ball too long because he's not processing, because I do think that's a question mark for him, playing in a pretty simplistic, a lot of screen pass offense in Oregon. That's going to be a problem for him. But keeping the ball clean, he could do that. He's got a strong arm. I've seen him hit some pretty sick off-platform throws, Max. I've seen him throw some really great dimes on the run. Again, we haven't seen it yet at these Senior Bowl practices, but we'll see in a few days if maybe he starts warming up and hitting those. But I've seen him throw some freaking lasers. Like some of his arm strength is there, and he's got that NFL build to me, 6'2", 216, looks a little bit stockier. I think he's kind of this class's Will Levis. He's a player that some view as a first-round pick, some view as a second-round pick. He's probably ultimately going to go at the back end of the first round or on day 2. But I think he's going to step in and find a moderate amount of success as a rookie because he is pretty pro-ready in my eyes. He keeps the ball clean. He stands strong in the pocket, and he's got a strong arm to make some pretty good throws. So I like Bo Nix. I think that a team is going to feel convicted on him on day 1, and you got no complaints from me on that. I do think that he could be reasonably justified as a first-round pick. I have him as a day 2 guy, but I think that Bo Nix has a lot of traits that are translatable to the NFL.
Totally. I mean, I like Bo. There's a lot of quarterbacks that I think are good in this class. I think this is like a pretty good class for quarterbacks. It might be one of the best in a long time, honestly, better than 2020, which is saying something. But Bo, okay, I'm gonna just go out and put this crazy label. I think Bo Nix is the most NFL ready quarterback in this draft class, but I'm not willing to put him in my top 5 simply because there's nothing like that really jumps out at me. He's like, he's just that guy. He's like, all right, we need a quarterback or we need a backup. Let's take Bo Nix. What's going to happen? What's the worst that can happen? I think his floor is really, really high. Like, I think his ceiling's really low. His floor is really high. I think he's just going to be a guy that comes in, spends a lot of time in the NFL, might start a few years, and there he goes. Like the epitome of game manager. Like, I don't think there's anything there that's like super crazy with Bo Nix. I think his like everything you said with his vision and his ability time to throw, his coolness under pressure, all of that's going to translate incredibly well to the NFL. But that's it. Like, I don't think he's really going to make that many plays. If he does well in the Senior Bowl, I'll be willing to move him up into my top 5. Maybe JJ like gets bumped down. I don't know. I just think like those 2 guys specifically are pretty transferable at 5 for me, but at least JJ has a little bit of that athleticism factor that Bo doesn't. So yeah, that's it. That's really it for me. I can't really clown on you for having him at 4 because I mean, especially as a Giants fan, you need like an Eli type guy to just stand there and throws the ball.
I don't think that's necessarily what it is, but I think, listen, you can have Nix here, you can have McCarthy there. I think they're pretty interchangeable, but really the narrative that I want to hit against for Bo Nix is I see people say he's another Mac Jones, and that's just like so off base for me. That's not accurate.
Yeah.
If anybody saying that, I mean, I can't get behind that one. Even if I'm not crazy about Bo Nix, like exactly. Like I like Bo Nix, but he is not a Mac Jones, guys. Like he is a much better player than Mac Jones was, in my opinion, coming out. So again, there's plenty of reason to have pause on Mac Jones. I mean, he started playing college football in 2019 and it's 2023 and here we are and he's finally turned himself into a really good player. That's definitely a reason to be upset. And also, he's never been sacked a whole lot. If you look at his career, Max, these are pretty crazy numbers. 2019, he was sacked 16 times, 17 and 21, 17 and 20, 11 and 21, 6 sacks in each of the last 2 seasons. That's it. He wasn't spending a whole lot of time under pressure. So if you do want to talk about how well is he going to perform at the next level, you do have to give something to that aspect of we haven't seen him perform in those NFL circumstances. In an NFL
Totally.
offense, definitely not, because they don't run that in Oregon. And then under the circumstances of, if let's say a team like a New York Giants drafted him at the beginning of round 2, just as an example, they have a terrible offensive line. It's disgusting and painful to watch. Bo Nix is going to get eaten alive. And so, yeah, there's a lot of pro-ready traits to him. But again, the only elite trait that I view him as having is that ability to keep the ball clean. And he's right there with those other guys, Michael
Oh, I
Penix
do want to
Jr.,
mention
JJ
something
McCarthy.
about Bo that I think is incredibly underlooked, and that's
Sure.
he was given a lot of free range to change the play at the line. If you
Nice.
watch his tape, he makes a ton of audibles. He'll call out hot routes. He'll change the protection. That's why I think he's most NFL ready, because he's been given basically like the keys to the offenses last year at Oregon.
Hmm.
Like he did a lot of it himself out there. Because the offensive coordinator is like relatively green, like literally. Bo has spent just as much time as a quarterback in college as like their offensive coordinator spent time coaching offenses in college. So he basically ran the show there a little bit, and it shows up on the tape. So that's just
Yeah.
one positive for Bo is mentally, he's probably like one of the best field generals, I guess, if you want to label an archetype on him.
Yeah, I think that's an important note. I definitely do. And I'm glad that you pointed that out. But I do want to just move into this top three though, because I know we're gonna have some good discussions in here.
Totally.
We have very different top threes. You have a pretty pretty interesting take on who your number one is. I want to dive into, I know we have the same number two, which is funny. We're swapped at 1 and 3. I want to dive into your number three first, because that'll transition pretty well into where I want to go. So why don't you drop the bomb on everybody and let everybody know who your number 3 quarterback in the class is?
Yeah. So we're talking about that special X factor. We're talking about that ability. And for number 3, I have Drake Maye out of North Carolina.
Yep.
And let me tell you why. I don't think you can go wrong in any of these 1, 2, or 3. I really
Sure.
don't. And then that might be a little bit of a cop out, but Drake May for me is one of the more, I don't know, like higher risk, higher reward type guys. He regressed severely from 22 to 23 stats wise, and a little bit showed up on his tape. I have issues with his feet, and I saw on Twitter someone was talking about like how great his platform is, and I disagree. Like if you sit and you watch him all the time, or if you watch a lot of his tape, you'll notice that it puts him in bad opportunities. He doesn't see the field as well as some of these other guys. He makes some dumb decisions. Decision making is bad. He has some crazy tells. He like slaps the ball all the time when he's right before he like rips it deep. I don't know. There's like a lot of issues. I think he could be. I think he's malleable. I think he's 6'4". He's a unit, right? He's a Josh Allen type. He can run. He can run you over, and that's alluring to a lot of teams. His accuracy is pretty nice, but I don't know. There's like something about Drake May that really makes me scratch my head, and I think just because of his size alone, and a few highlights is the reason why people are even considering him so high. I don't know. I don't really see it, and I could be wrong, but I think he's 3 for me. I think he's better than Penix. I think he's going to have a potentially a better career than Michael Penix, so that's why I have him at 3 clearly, but I don't know. There's just not enough there for him to be number 1 or 2 for me when I can look at some of these other guys that can really make some incredible plays just by themselves.
Yeah, I think Drake May's ability to get off script and make plays by himself is actually quite incredible. I've seen some plays. I mean, there's one, it was against Pitt, where they're probably on the 5-yard line. I want to say it's in the pistol. He rolls left, breaks a tackle, throws the ball with his left hand for a touchdown. I thought that was stellar. I mean, he's got the ability to do that stuff. And so let me respond to what you said with sometimes there's these head scratching moments. I call this the Josh Allen factor, where he'll be on a roll and he'll be fiery hot. He'll be ripping missiles down the middle of the field, bombs for 50 yards. And then the next play, he throws it in triple coverage and you have no idea what the hell just happened. It's a Josh Allen thing. It's what he does. And that's my pro comp for Drake May, because with the good and the bad, it reminds you a lot of Josh Allen. But I'll talk more about him once we get to him on my rankings. I'll go ahead and dive into my number 3 guy here. Don't want to reveal just yet where I have Drake May, but number 3 guy for me is Jayden Daniels. And I absolutely love Jayden Daniels, and he could be higher for me. He could jump into the top two, possibly. And I know I did a video on this channel talking about why he could go number one overall in the draft. And I've seen now a little bit more buzz for that, with analysts saying he could be a number one pick. So my bold prediction is starting to gain a little bit of traction. I don't view him as the best player in the draft. I wouldn't take him number one. However, the things that I love about Jayden Daniels, we all know the athleticism is there. Okay, he's an elite athlete. He can run. His speed is legit, right? I love that he takes care of the football. He doesn't put it in harm's way, but at the same time, he pushes the ball downfield. So if you want to use those PFF stats, right, the ones that we like to talk about with the turnover worthy throws, right? He had 1.6% of his plays were turnover worthy, but he also had 8.4% of his plays as big time throws, which was the second best in the SEC this past season. So he's not one of those guys that takes what's in front of him and doesn't take risks. He takes a ton of risks, but they're calculated risks, and they never end up being balls that end up in harm's way. Like, he is just really good at keeping the ball clean, and he's supremely accurate. And I know you got a lot to say about Jayden Daniels in a second here, but I'll just keep going through some of my traits. I think he throws the prettiest and most accurate deep ball in the class. I think he has really good touch on his football. And I think that his decision making, like I said, is excellent. And the other thing that I really like, and I've seen a little bit of a split debate here. I've seen some fans and analysts agree with me on this, and I've seen other have a different take. I think that he is very good in rhythm and in structure. And again, I know there's debate on this one, because you will see some plays on his film where maybe he gets a little bit of happy feet and his timing is off. But overall, I think there's a lot of clips, because LSU's bread and butter this past season was the 8-yard curl. You would just have Neighbors and Brian Thomas Jr. on the outside running curls all game long. And obviously that's not an NFL offense, but what I will say to that is Jayden Daniels would get a snap, he would take one drop, he would hitch, and he would fire before the wide receiver breaks, and it would be right there on their chest as soon as they broke for an easy completion. And those rhythm throws were so frequent, and not only on those curl routes or on those hitches, there was also some on crossers. I just really like his ability to play in rhythm. And it's not perfect. There were some lapses. I think if you watch that Alabama game, if you take a look at the all 22 on that, Max, I think you're going to be really excited, because in the first quarter, I would say there were definitely lapses in his ability to play in rhythm. But as the game wore on, he got more and more comfortable. And by the end of it, he was throwing some really, really good balls in rhythm, in the structure of the pocket, and in the play design, and playing some really good football. Saw the same thing against FSU, against Florida as well. He had some really, really good plays on those film that were in structure and in the pocket. So I've seen guys on Twitter call him, a scrambler and a guy who doesn't throw the ball well. It's just not accurate. He throws the ball probably just as well as anybody in this class. He's super accurate. And he's just a really good decision maker and processor, in my opinion. He sees the field better than most of the guys in this class. There's one play, I think it was against FSU, where he had a little bit of pressure coming from his right side. His right tackle was getting beat. So he starts to shift a little bit to the left in the pocket, but the drag route was going left to right. Shifts left, throws right. And I was like, okay, college quarterbacks a lot of the times can't make that throw, even though it's only a short intermediate throw. But you've got a man coverage route there. If that ball is behind that receiver, it's going to be a pick the other way. He shifts, throws it calmly under pressure. Perfect. And that happened a lot. So that's why I think Jayden Daniels has a really underrated pocket presence and a really underrated ability to play in structure and in rhythm. And that's why I view him so highly. The one thing that I will say, though, is getting off script. I'm going to talk more about Drake Maye and his ability to get off script, and we're going to talk about Caleb, obviously. But Jayden Daniels, when he gets off script, I don't think he makes a whole lot happen. It's kind of, he tucks it and he runs with it. I would like to see him tuck it, keep his head up, and find an open man. That doesn't happen very often. If he's not finding the guy within the structure of the play, he's just taking off and running. That's something that he needs to iron out. So I like to talk about the good and the bad. That's the bad for me. And again, a little bit of inconsistency in his footwork, but really, he's a sound prospect, and he is worthy of being a top 10 pick in my eyes.
Yeah, I'm gonna save comments for Jayden because he's higher for me.
Sure. So let's just go into our number two, because we both have number two, which is Caleb Williams. So that reveals it. I've got Drake Maye number one, Caleb two, Jayden Daniels three. You have Jayden number one, Caleb two,
number one,
and Drake number three. So I'll let you we won't spend too much time on Caleb, because there's a whole hour-long episode that you guys can go check out for our thoughts on that. But we'll give our brief thoughts on it. Max, I'll let you kind of kick it off there with Caleb before I let you transition up into the Jayden Daniels talk.
Yeah, Caleb, insanely high ceiling. A little scary, stat regression. but incredible arm, incredible presence in the pocket, really. Has issues with potentially turnover plays, but puts balls into the hands of receivers that are just like mind blowing. Can see the field incredibly well when he wants to. There's some inconsistency issues, but man, I mean, to talk about making something out of nothing sometimes is just what he does, and it's hard to not like what he can do. I know there's a ton of question marks. I know this year specifically was a question mark because he had a really bright light on him with GQ and everything after winning the Heisman. But I don't know. I just think if there's like a pure raw talent guy, Caleb Williams is probably him, right? I mean, I don't know if there's anything else we need to say. Just um, what I personally really like about him is to your point, he's still the pass first guy. He knows he can pick it up with his feet. He can do whatever he wants with the ball, but he'll run around in the pocket for 15 seconds and wait for someone to be open because the play was busted because talent's not there. And he'll find the guy and he'll throw it. And that's how you win in the NFL, isn't just tucking and running. It's picking up 30, 40 yards in the air or 10 yards in the air and letting the guy yards after catch get 20 instead of just picking up 10 with your feet, So I mean, that's the stuff that I think is really wow with Caleb, and that's why he's 2 for me.
Yeah, the wow is there for Caleb, and I'm not even gonna lie. I had him at number 1. I made a last minute decision to switch it and put Drake Maye at number 1, just because I go back and forth on this, and I'm gonna continue to go back and forth on this. And this is
Totally,
should have been a disclaimer at the beginning of the episode. Our rankings now are probably gonna be different by the time we get to the draft.
without a doubt.
It's so fluid. You watch these guys, you find something new every single time, whether it's good or bad. But the things with Caleb, I mean, we mentioned it. We think generational arm talent, generational ability to make plays off script. He's got elite accuracy. He's got elite athleticism. There's a lot of things he does really well, but there are reservations about the things he doesn't do so well. His mechanics, maybe not the best. The footwork, I'm a pretty harsh critic of his footwork. He is kind of small. I think he's closer to Kyler Murray than he is to, definitely to a Drake Maye. Like he's more of a Kyler Murray build in this class. But he makes all the throws. I just think his ability to perform under pressure is a huge question mark for me. Keeping the off the field stuff out of this, on the field, throwing under pressure. The fumbles this past season were a big red flag. And the fact that he didn't play in an NFL style offense, he played in that Lincoln Riley offense, which is really tough to transition from into the NFL. It just
Right.
is. And like you even mentioned, talent that he was throwing to caused him to kind of make plays on his own and be the superhero sometimes. It's not only that, it's also the fact that the routes were just so unimaginative and they were
Yeah.
only there to create space downfield so that he could run around for 5 seconds and throw the ball into open windows. Like that's literally what the play design was sometimes. Like, hey, everybody run this route and then just start running around for Caleb. That's what
Shout
it
out
was.
A-Ray.
And yeah, and Lincoln Riley relied on that strategy far too often, which put Caleb in some tricky situations and made him look like the supervillain rather than the superhero. So I think Caleb Williams is a phenomenal talent. I'm super excited to see him at the next level. Hopefully, any debatable red flags about his personality and everything, I hope that it doesn't, end up coming back to bite him. I think that he's just got so much talent. He's going to be so fun to watch at the next level if he does pan out. But Max, let's circle back to the Jayden Daniels conversation. Then I'll finish off with Drake Maye. Tell me why you have Jayden Daniels as your number 1 quarterback in this draft class right now.
Okay, so for number 1, I have a little bit of a stunner, and that's Jayden Daniels. A lot of what you said was great. I think what's so funny is we list off all these negatives about Caleb, but we're like, but that arm though, like oh he's bad under pressure most of the time. He makes some weird decisions. He runs around maybe a little bit too much. He gets sacked a lot. Maybe these are his fault, maybe they're not. But that arm. For Jayden Daniels, the only really negative that we have is, well, sometimes he tucks and runs too much, which, by the way, like won him a Heisman and whatever. But also that, like, I don't know, his ball doesn't have as much zip as like Drake Maye's does. Those are like his 2 big concerns. Those are like his 2 big complaints. And the feet and the timing's just a little bit off on the hitch for the curl routes. Okay. Well, I don't know. For me, I overlooked that. I look at a guy who threw for a ton of yards, 4 interceptions, 40 touchdowns. Sure, he was throwing to Brian Thomas Jr. and I'm sorry, Malik Neighbors.
Neighbors, yeah.
Like, yeah, of course, you're probably going to do well with two wide receivers like that. But how much of like their draft stock rose? Because there he is. There's my cat. My cat's been driving me crazy. How much of their draft stock rose because of Jayden Daniels' play this year? And for me, right, the number one thing that I think counts more than almost anything else, and again, this is just pure analytics stat head guy, is did you progress while you were in college? You went to college football to get better in order to be good enough to play in the pros. Jayden Daniel took such a big leap this year. It's almost mind boggling. He was in zero conversations to be even close to number one overall, QB1, QB2, QB3 this season. But here we are having conversations where he's potentially QB1 because of the stats that he put up this season. He wasn't supposed to win the Heisman, right? And here he is. It's insane how good this kid has gotten, how quickly. And I think that if I'm a team, I have to take notice of that. I have to be like, holy cow, this guy has gotten really good. He spent a few years in college, right? He's not coming out early. That's great. So he's been around. He's had those reps. For the amount of yards that he's thrown, for the amount of attempts that he's had, his average pass yardage is really high, right? For having as many attempts as JJ McCarthy, but almost over 1,000 more air yards, it's pretty insane to me. So yeah, there's just so much to like about Jayden Daniels. And everyone compares him to Lamar Jackson, right? Just because of the ability to make guys look silly on his feet while he's rushing the ball. But what's so crazy, and again, Lamar is a very natural, gifted passer, right? But it's very clear in that offense that why not pick up yards with his feet if you can? Jayden Daniels can throw the ball incredibly well deep. He has such nice loft to it, and it looks so pretty. His middle of the field air yards are like percentage isn't super great. His zip like that's a serious issue, I guess. But I don't know. For me, that's things that you can really hamper down if you add some strength to him in the offseason. You work on his mechanics a little bit. You have a guy who could seriously make some plays in the NFL, and I think that's something worth taking note. And I think it's something you take a risk on, right? His ceiling is MVP. I really do think it is. I think like you're looking at potentially Lamar Jackson 2.0 that might be inclined towards throwing the ball more. That's a game changer. That's a guy you win games with, right? So for me, Jayden's got to be number one because there's just more positives to me than there are negatives.
Yeah, I mean, I see way more positives than there are negatives as well. I think to your point, we've seen some fans be critical about his year 5 breakout, saying it took him too long to have that breakout, and that gives him reservation. I disagree with that because of the things that you just mentioned, where he got better every single year. And a big selling point on that note for me, he went from ASU to LSU. Yes, I understand he started playing with a lot of better talent. He started facing a lot better talent. He started going off against some of these best college defenses. Like he faced some really good pro style defenses like Alabama, some pro talents like Jared versus Florida State. Like he faced off against really good players and he succeeded and had a Heisman winning campaign. So I see it with Jayden Daniels. I do think that it's worth noting. I'm going to bring up two red flags though, two weaknesses that I see that I haven't heard you bring up. So I want to get your take on those. The frame, I think that's a big one. He's very thin. Can he hold up in the NFL? That's a big question mark. And coupled with that, his tendency to not slide and think that he's Derrick Henry when he's not. He's like the pencil version of Derrick Henry. He runs into the most ridiculous hits, takes the biggest shots. And I really do question whether or not he can hold up at the next level. We haven't seen him sustain some major injury doing all this crazy stuff at the collegiate level and running into these big tackles. However, he's also just not getting hit nearly as frequently in college as he will be in the NFL. He's going to get sacked more. He's going to get hit as he throws more. And I'm not saying that he can't handle those things because I think he plays well under pressure. But at the next level, he needs to slide. And even if he doesn't, because he's going to be getting hitting more, how much does that frame concern you, Max? Because I know that it's something that concerns a lot of fans, including myself.
So 6'4", 210, right? He's about the same weight as Lamar Jackson, but he's 2 inches taller. Yeah, I mean, like that's concerning. I think only concerning because he does take too many hits. He doesn't slide. We saw that with some other quarterbacks in the NFL when they transitioned and they got hurt, right? Lamar has had availability issues in his career because he's taken big hits. Um, so yeah, that's definitely a concern, but I think that's also something that I don't know. I feel like maybe I'm overestimating that, but I think sliding particularly is something you might be able to improve upon in the league. Like if you take a
Yeah.
real big initiative on just getting down, because these guys are huge. These guys are going to hurt you if you
Yep.
don't. Um, I think that's definitely something that he can improve upon. And I don't know. I don't think I'm going to turn down a guy that can sling it this well consistently and improved as much as he had just because he takes body shots. I don't think that's something that I'm willing to be like, no, actually, I'm not going to pick this guy. I think any team's going to be lucky to get him. I think someone's going to move up to grab him. I really do. I think if Chicago doesn't take him at number one, that there's going to be some bidding wars at two potentially. If the Commanders don't take him, well then now three, right? Like I don't know. I think specifically as we look at the combine, his stock's going to rise. I think throughout the rest of this offseason, his stock is going to rise. And I think if there's anyone legitimately able to break into that or to challenge the dynamics between the Caleb and the Drake May conversation, it has to be Jayden Daniels, because you can't look at these stats, you can't look at these plays and just pretend that he's like not good, right? That he's not top three, that he's potentially not top two. I don't know. I think Pat McAfee was saying it. Mel Kiper's been saying it. If there's a guy that's going to rise drastically, it's going to be Jayden Daniels. So
Yeah.
that's why he's number one for me. Again, like just more pros and cons. Like it's that simple for me. I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm
I
oversimplifying it, but
No, I don't think you are. I mean, sometimes it is that simple. And I spoke with former NFL draft scout Dan Kelly earlier this week, and he kind of said the same thing, where scouting isn't that hard. It's more pros and cons and finding out which of those pros are translatable to the next level versus which cons aren't. And that's kind of when you look at Jayden Daniels, a lot of that stuff is translatable. Like his accuracy is always going to be translatable. His athleticism is translatable. And again, I think his ability to play in structure. I do get pause from his measurements, his slight frame, but he's still number three for me, firmly number three. It's not even close. I think that there's a tier with those top three, and then there's a tier with that next three, and there's a pretty big gap in between for me. So I love Daniels, and I think I agree with you. I think he's going to be a top five pick in this class. I think that there's a lot of hype that's going to continue to surround him and continue to get more intense through the combine process as teams meet him and everything. You said it. Mel Kiper has him shooting up the board. I did that video where I boldly predicted he's going to be a number one pick, not because I think he should be, but just because I think a team is going to be really enamored by him at the time of the NFL draft. But let me go ahead and wrap this up with my Drake May analysis, kind of dive into it. First of all, you're talking about the prototypical build. You're talking about the 229 pounds at 6'4". Like that's the size that you want. That's 20 pounds heavier than Jayden Daniels at the same height. He's 22. He's young. He's got a rocket of an arm. He makes crazy throws off platform and on the run, and he does great things off script. And he also wins from the pocket a lot. And he makes pro throws. Like you'll see him fit crossing routes into tight windows. You'll see him throw on a smash concept, that corner route where most quarterbacks can't make that throw, but he gets it in there with little effort. And the arm strength saves him sometimes. The aggression is there. I think it's one of those arguments where you talk about quarterbacks who aren't aggressive enough and trying to get them out of their shell versus really aggressive and reining them in. He's super aggressive. You might have to rein him in a little bit, but I'd rather have the aggression. And that's what I love about Drake May. I just think he's super aggressive, looks downfield first and comes back to short, and does hit his checkdowns. I've seen him do it. I've seen him get aggressive and then rein himself in. One thing, though, he doesn't throw with very much touch. He's got a lot of velocity on his balls, but he rarely has any air underneath them. They just kind of bullet right after people. But again, that's one of those Josh Allen traits. When I watched Josh Allen at Wyoming, his film from college, I mean, the guy was running all over the place, was hurdling people, taking big shots. Drake May does that same stupid stuff, but he also had a cannon of an arm with straight velocity and no touch, just like Drake May. And he threw all the throws, pro throws at every level, in the short to medium to deep range. So that's what I see with Drake May. He's my QB1. Comparing him to Caleb, it's a little bit apples to oranges, but just because they're very different in their playing style, but their strengths are also very similar. And I think if you want to talk about somebody who's a little bit more pro ready and able to stand into a pocket through plays and not rely on his legs to buy him more time, I like Drake Maye's ability to stand in the pocket, hit every single throw, do it with timing, do it with accuracy, but also when the structure of the play collapses, he can make some special things happen.
Totally. I think you're right on all of those points, and particularly I think when we're talking about his ability to just throw lasers and darts, he has, I think, the best stats in college football in throwing in the middle of the field. That right there alone is like, okay, this kid can play in the NFL, because the quarterbacks who consistently perform the best are the ones that can put it in the middle of the field, right? Where there typically are, the more difficult throws to make. But guess what? That's where majority of your routes are running in between the hashes. So that's huge. That's huge. So that alone, like, it really raises some eyebrows on his just ability to perform at the next level. Yeah, I mean, I think his raw talent, I think he's more of a project guy. I really do. I think he's going to need a few years to bake, like Josh Allen did, rightfully so. And he might be the next. A lot of people like to call him Justin Herbert, but I really do think Herbert was better out of college than Drake Maye was, but I think they have similar ceilings. So yeah, I don't know. It's just like, he's like your bread and butter quarterback prospect. Like, every year there's just that one big, tall, strong dude that can throw darts, and you're like, yep, he's gonna go really early because that's what you want. Like, he's just a purebred quarterback. But yeah, I totally get it. And if you're high on Drake Maye, you should be. And if you want to defend Drake Maye in the comments and on Twitter, you should, because I mean, it's fair, and we'll see where he goes, either 2 or 3, or Chicago might stun everybody and take him at 1. Who knows? We still got a lot of time left.
You mean the Giants are going to take him at 1 when they trade up with Chicago? Yes, I understand.
Yeah, my bad. I'm so sorry. Just like they won the Super Bowl, right? Or
yes,
they're going into the Super Bowl.
Yeah, it's Giants versus Ravens in the Super Bowl next week. I can't wait. But Drake Maye, I will say, again, I kind of touched on it earlier, but his ability to make a bad play worse, not his ability, I shouldn't call it that, his tendency to make a bad play worse, that's definitely the one thing that screams red flag, and like that's his biggest flaw. But that's more so, to me, just pressing and trying to be the hero at times where he doesn't have the capabilities to do it, which I know is like kind of a big red flag for a lot of people, but it's just the Josh Allen trait to me. I just see so much Josh Allen in his game, gives me so many reminders of Josh Allen. And again, playing with subpar talent. I'm not high on Tez Walker. I don't think Tez Walker is a very impressive player, and that was his best receiver that he was throwing to. I don't think his line was all that great. I know people bring up that Duke game and mention that he really struggled against Duke. I don't know, man. That was a hard fought rivalry game. He made some really dumb mistakes in that game, but he also didn't have a lot of talent playing alongside him. It was UNC versus Duke. It wasn't like he was just playing against a crappy Duke team. He was playing with a crappy team himself, and he really went balls to the walls and showed a lot of heart and passion in that game. And I thought that was something that stood out as well. There's intangible traits to be mentioned in Drake Maye too.
He has a tough legacy to shake off, though, considering the past couple of products that come out of UNC. And I think that's like a red flag for some people. I don't know if that's fair, but I mean, Mitch Trubisky and Sam Howell aren't like the greatest examples of.
Yeah, I don't think it's fair, because Ohio State 5 years ago had the same exact criticism. Everybody's like, yeah, Ohio State, quarterbacks can't turn into NFL products, and now look at CJ Stroud. So, I mean, it's actually even LSU. We wouldn't even be having this Jayden Daniels conversation if not for Joe Burrow. Yeah. Somebody has to come into the league and prove that a quarterback can come from that school. I think Drake Maye,
like Tom Brady, University of Michigan, and future Tom Brady, JJ McCarthy.
Right, totally, 100%. I think that's a perfect way to end this. So if you guys think that JJ McCarthy is the next Tom Brady, comment it down below. Let us know who your QB5 rankings are. Who's on your list? I know it's a lot different for everybody. That scout that I spoke to, former scout Dan Kelly, has Spencer Rattler as his QB1. It's crazy, and not a lot of people have that take. I think it was like 1% of people, or some stat that he brought up for me. He knew it somehow on some draft guide, but anyway, it's a polarizing class. It's an exciting class. It's chock full of talent, and I love diving into these guys. There's just so many different episodes that we can do discussing these guys, Max. And again, these boards are going to change by the time the draft rolls around, but draft season is going to be fun, primarily because of these quarterbacks. And I just can't wait to see it all unfold and see how successful, which one of these guys are successful and which one of them aren't.
Yeah, totally. I mean, that's the fun part, right? Is we get to watch them grow, and the sad part is when we really like them and they end up, if they fail, that
Right.
always sucks. But yeah, it's exciting to see. We'll probably revisit this in a few months, right before the draft, because I guarantee you something's going to change. So
I agree. Yeah, and it'll be fun to revisit and look back on what our takes were then versus now, and so that's going to be a good time. But if you guys enjoyed this, please leave a like. Really do appreciate how much support the channel has received so early on to its inception. 4 episodes in, 12,000 views through the 4 episodes. That's sick. Thank you guys. I'm glad you're enjoying the content. Glad you're enjoying me having my partner in crime, Maxx, on the channel alongside me. Super grateful that Maxx keeps joining me for these super long-winded episodes. So thank you, Maxx.
as
And
long as you keep having me,
yep, and thank you everybody tuning in, and like, subscribe, and all that fun stuff. And we'll see you in the next one. Peace.
see ya.